The perfect facade. From the outside, Emily Parker's life sparkled under the golden Texas sun. Their home, nestled at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac in a picturesque suburb just outside of Houston, was the image of suburban stability. A neatly trimmed lawn, a basketball hoop by the driveway, and shrubs exploding with late spring flowers. Neighbors often remarked how the Parkers looked like the kind of family you'd see on a magazine cover, always waving and smiling, the embodiment of the American dream. Emily, still in her late 20s, yet bearing the gentle wisdom of someone older, was widely admired. Whether cheering on the sidelines at her daughter's soccer games or organizing bake sales at Sophie's elementary school, she had an easy charm that seemed effortless. Her laughter was soft, almost melodic, and rarely did anyone see her without a smile. Most people assumed she was content, grateful even, for the life she'd built. David Parker, her husband, was spoken of in equally glowing terms. To colleagues at the oil and gas firm where he worked as a mid-level executive, he was friendly, generous, charismatic, the guy who never missed a company barbecue and always lent a helping hand. At church, he was the first to volunteer, the one who remembered birthdays and anniversaries, offering handshakes and kind words wherever he went. In social circles, David played the attentive husband, laying a casual arm across Emily's shoulders, sharing proud stories of their daughter, Sophie. In Sophie, just shy of 8, was a bright-eyed, energetic child, known to all in the neighborhood, thanks to her boundless curiosity and sweet nature. Her room overflowed with books and soccer trophies. Her drawings, taped to the refrigerator, were little testaments to a joyful childhood. Their evenings were snapshots of domestic bliss. Emily and David chatted over home-cooked meals, lasagna, cornbread, roast chicken, while Sophie chattered about school. On weekends, the family strolled in the park together or attended church, blending seamlessly into their small-town community. Friends and neighbors viewed the Parkers as a model family. Emily's social media was filled with sunny photos. Sophie's school recitals, backyard barbecues, and family picnics under vast Texas skies. In block parties and get-togethers, she was always poised and gracious, greeting everyone with warmth and remembering small details about their lives. The Parker house radiated comfort and order. Emily's touch was everywhere, from the cheerful wreath on the front door to the cozy throw blankets draped across the living room sofa. Flowers from the garden sat in vases by the fireplace. Cookies baked that morning cooled on the kitchen counter. The air seemed to hum with the quiet harmony of a well-kept home. Yet beneath all this, there were moments when Emily's eyes seemed to flicker with something unspoken, a fleeting shadow quickly replaced by her practiced smile. Those who noticed chalked it up to exhaustion or the pressures of motherhood. David, for his part, sometimes carried himself with attention that was brushed aside as mere stress from work. No one suspected otherwise. Why would they? The Parker family fit the mold, living proof that good things came to good people. And so, their perfect facade held firm, uncracked, and shining as another day began, and the world looked on, none the wiser to what truly lingered behind the closed doors of their suburban haven. Darkness behind the door, the Parker home, changed the moment the front door closed behind visitors and neighbors. The bright warmth outside faded into a heaviness that seemed to cling to the air, as if the walls themselves harbored secrets. The tidy rooms, so cheerful in daylight, grew stifling with silence at night, broken only by the muffled clatter of dishes or the low murmur of a television. Emily's face, once effortlessly radiant among friends, now bore a careful composure that bordered on brittle. Even in the comfort of her own kitchen, she moved with quiet purpose, always alert to the subtle shifts in the household. The creak of the stairs, the measured pacing of David's footsteps overhead. She had learned to sense his moods even before he spoke, a certain tightness in his voice, the way he dismissed her with a glance, or how he lingered a second too long in the doorway, as if weighing what words or actions would follow. David's anger, unpredictable and quick to flare, rarely announced itself. It could settle on trivial things: a misplaced remote, a lukewarm dinner, an innocent question from Sophie at the wrong moment. His voice, in public, so gentle and charming, became sharp and icy within the privacy of their walls. Sometimes he lashed out physically. Sometimes the blows were verbal, slicing deep into Emily's confidence with cruel precision. He rarely left visible marks, but his controlling nature was a constant. He decided what Emily wore, where she went, who she spoke to. Her cell phone was an object of his scrutiny. Her friendships gradually pruned down to polite acquaintances. For Emily, each day required a delicate balancing act. She measured her words, weighed her reactions, and braced herself for the unexpected. She became an expert at swallowing fear, marshaling her nerves for Sophie's sake. If she could keep Sophie's world unbroken, if bedtime stories could end with a smile, then perhaps the darkness would stay contained. Above all, Emily's fiercest instinct was to shield her daughter from harm. Sophie, sensitive and observant beyond her years, sometimes overheard David's harsh tones. On those nights, Emily would draw her close, brushing back hair from Sophie's forehead, whispering gentle reassurances she only half believed herself. She told Sophie her parents were just tired, that tomorrow would be better, but the child's wide eyes betrayed a silent understanding. Outsiders saw none of this. When the Parkers appeared at church or on the soccer field, Emily's sleeve or scarf covered the faint bruises. A slip on the stairs, she'd say, or just being clumsy. If a neighbor asked about her subdued expression, she'd brush it off, deftly changing the subject, never trusting anyone with the truth. In the rare moments she allowed herself to grieve for what her life had become, Emily clung to memories of happier times. The early days when David's smile didn't unnerve her, when love was simple and laughter genuine. But those memories felt distant now, like fragile relics submerged beneath years of tension and hurt. Late at night, when the house had finally settled and Sophie was asleep, Emily sometimes stood at the window, staring into the blue hush beyond the glass. She wondered if anyone outside sensed what happened after dark, or if the neighbors' lights, one by one, blinking out, only marked her return to another round of careful silence and dread. Alone in those long, quiet hours, Emily's mind spun with fear and self-doubt. What if leaving made things worse? How could she protect Sophie from both the man David had become and the judgment of a world that never saw the cracks? For now, she pressed onward, surviving one day at a time, determined that however battered her spirit had grown, it was not broken beyond hope. As dawn approached, Emily steeled herself, donned the cheerful mask, pack Sophie's lunch, smile at David as if nothing were amiss. Another day began, new shadows tucked neatly behind a door that only she and Sophie truly understood. The spark of rebellion. Emily woke that morning with a sense of heaviness she could no longer ignore. She moved through her routine with careful efficiency, making breakfast while Sophie colored at the kitchen table, her little legs swinging above the tile floor and her chatter filling the silence. David's presence loomed as he descended the stairs, a chilled quietness descending with him, heavy and expectant. The day unraveled like any other until late afternoon. That was when everything changed. David's temper, razor thin and unpredictable, flared over a trivial matter. Sophie had accidentally knocked over a glass of water onto a stack of his paperwork. His anger was immediate and terrifying. His words venomous. Emily rushed to smooth things over, maintaining calm for Sophie's sake. But in the narrow hallway, the confrontation turned physical. One sharp shove, Emily lost her balance. Her head struck the doorframe with a sickening thud, and then she was on the floor, the world wavering and blurry. For a moment, there was only ringing in her ears and Sophie's frightened gasp. David's apology, if one could call it that, was cold and perfunctory, a muttered curse at her clumsiness. While the pain radiated from her scalp, what cut deeper was David's complete lack of concern. He left the room, slamming the door behind him, leaving Emily and her daughter sitting shell-shocked on the cold floor. As dusk bled into evening, the accident gnawed at Emily's mind. The injury was worse than usual. Her temple throbbed, and a purple bruise bloomed beneath her hairline. Sophie was unusually quiet, clinging to her mother's side with silent worry. Emily wanted desperately to reassure her, but something had shifted inside. For the first time, she felt less ashamed of her pain and more furious. Furious at David, at the unfairness, at herself for tolerating so much for so long. That night, Emily sat across from her daughter on Sophie's twin bed, brushing the child's dark curls with shaky hands. Sophie watched her mother with wide, solemn eyes. Emily lied, her voice gentle but unconvincing. "I'm fine, sweetheart. Everything will be okay." In the days that followed, the pain from her injury lingered, a constant, pounding reminder. At work, David maintained his mask, but at home, his mood was unpredictable and menacing. Emily's resolve grew like a slow flame, burning through dry grass. She no longer made excuses for his behavior to herself. Carefully, she began to observe him, not with fear, but with meticulous, growing suspicion. That fateful afternoon replayed in her mind. The look in his eyes, the force of his hand, the cold disregard afterward. What if this escalation was a warning of worse to come? The mother-daughter bond between Emily and Sophie only deepened under the weight of what they endured. Emily became fiercely protective, not just in action, but in her thoughts. She started to think about what freedom might look like, about a life not dictated by David's moods. In the quiet of night, she whispered small promises to Sophie and to herself. "I will not let this happen to us again. I will not let you grow up afraid." For the first time since her marriage began to fracture, Emily allowed herself to dream of escape. She sensed there would be risks, that challenging David might call forth his worst, but she could not imagine returning to mindless compliance. She began reading articles in secret about domestic violence, searching for stories of other women who had found a way out. She considered, for the first time, what evidence she might need to speak the truth and be believed. The seed of rebellion had taken root. Even as David continued to exert his control, something in Emily had changed fundamentally. She became more alert, more analytical, storing away details in the quiet corners of her mind. She was no longer resolved simply to survive. Now, at last, she was determined to fight back, for her daughter and for herself. This awakening signaled both a new danger and a new hope. In the hush of night, with Sophie nestled safely beside her, Emily stared at the shadowed ceiling and felt her resolve strengthening. Love for her daughter and the memory of who she'd been before David hardened her into steel. The spark of rebellion glimmered in the darkness, a promise that the long night would not last forever. Gathering evidence in secret. The days that followed, Emily's awakening settled like a watchful fog over the Parker household. Emily's senses sharpened, her nerves humming with anxious energy, her movements suddenly more deliberate. She had made a choice, a quiet declaration, one she did not speak aloud, not even to Sophie. No longer would she slip through each day as a shadow, invisible and unheard. Now, she would watch, learn, and prepare. All around her, the mask of normalcy remained. For David, for Sophie, for a neighborhood that saw only what it wished to see. But inside, Emily was building a case, detail by agonizing detail, against the man she'd once thought would be her protector. The beginning of evidence. Her first step was as subtle as it was terrifying. Huddled in the dim light of the upstairs bathroom, Emily lifted her hair from her temple and photographed the deep purple bruise blooming beneath her skin. Her hands shook as she checked the images, making sure they were clear, but not incriminating if discovered. She emailed them to a new address she'd created at the local library, a place David would never think to check. She named the folder something innocuous, recipes for PTA. Everything had to be hidden perfectly. If David found a single suspicious file or email, she knew exactly how swiftly his rage could turn life-threatening. Every fresh mark was documented with her cell phone, always in silent mode, always erased from the camera roll. The evidence spoke for itself. Already, each bruise, scrape, and swelling told a silent story of a glass thrown during an argument, of a grip that left fingerprints on her upper arm, of nights spent trembling after the slow, venomous hiss of David's anger faded into dark silence. But bruises faded. Words, too, could vanish, but not if she caught them. Emily began recording their arguments, her phone tucked into the pocket of her cardigan, the voice memo app open and armed. She learned where in the house David's voice would be least likely to echo into Sophie's room, and made excuses to lead painful conversations there. Later at the library computer, she listened back to the chilling tone, the threats and curses, masked when others were present. In those moments, David's voice was unambiguous, poisonous, threatening, impossible to ignore. Emily cataloged every file, giving each a code so she could trace the timeline, chronicles of her pain, but also a testament to her resolve, cultivating allies. Emily also understood she would need allies, witnesses, for when her word was not enough. She volunteered more at Sophie's school and began striking up gentle, casual conversations with neighbors. Small talk about school events or gardening led to deeper connections. She asked about their weekends, their families, and listened closely, sometimes guiding the discussion to stress at home or how to handle difficult situations. Though she never revealed her own suffering, she kept mental notes of who seemed trustworthy, compassionate, and observant, There was Mrs. Jensen, 3 houses down, who always stayed outside, chatting as the sun faded behind the elms, and who seemed to notice when Emily's smile dropped for just a moment too long. There was also Ava, another young mom at the playground, who had confided about her own challenging divorce the previous year. Both women became lifelines, people who could one day vouch for her character, her steadiness as a mother, and perhaps, if necessary, her fear. One afternoon, Emily lingered outside the schoolyard after pickup, making conversation with Ava while the kids raced around the swing set. Sophie, usually lively, clung quietly to Emily's hand, a sure sign she was still rattled by David's latest outburst. When Ava gently inquired, "Rough week?" Emily hesitated, then nodded, allowing herself a brief, vulnerable sigh. She stopped short of the full truth, but let enough sadness show that Ava later texted, "I'm here if you need to talk, day or night," connecting with support. The most consequential step was contacting a victim's advocate. Using the pretense of a library book club, Emily slipped away for an afternoon, her heart thundering as she entered the cozy strip mall office of Safe Haven, Texas. There, she met Julia, friendly, direct, and quietly fierce. Julia did not look at Emily with pity, but with recognition. And for the first time, Emily felt both emboldened and heartbroken by her own story. Julia explained the importance of documentation, photographs, audio recordings, written logs with times and dates. She urged Emily to note threats, track every incident with specificity, and save any text messages or emails, including David's rare apologies, full of gaslighting phrases meant to make Emily question her own memory. "Facts," Julia said, "are your armor. When people like him try to rewrite your story, this is what will protect you and your daughter." Julia also introduced Emily to the safety plan, a meticulous script for what to do if she ever needed to escape quickly. A packed tote hidden in her car's trunk, a list of code words to text trusted friends, an extra set of house keys stashed at a neighbor's. Emily committed every step to memory, terrified and relieved by Julia's clarity. Leaving would be dangerous, but it would not be chaos. The constant threat all the while, David's vigilance grew. Perhaps sensing a shift, maybe the subtle coolness in Emily's voice, or the way she kept her phone closer, he became more controlling. He demanded to see her texts, checked her call logs, even stopped by the house unexpectedly in the middle of her errands. Emily learned that her best weapon was to be completely unmemorable, to act as though nothing had changed, nothing was brewing beneath her steady gaze. Living a double life took its toll. At night, Emily rarely slept. Her mind raced, replaying every interaction, double-checking that her evidence was hidden, that her allies might not give her away. Each morning, she combed her hair to cover bruises, covered trembling hands as she packed Sophie's lunch, and practiced her smile in the bathroom mirror until it passed for real. The fear was omnipresent, but now it had a rival, purpose. Sometimes she doubted herself. Was she being paranoid? Was she endangering her daughter by taking these risks, by sowing seeds of doubt in Sophie's mind, or risking a violent outburst from David if she was caught? Each time those worries surfaced, she focused on the tangible facts, the pictures, the files, the voice memos, and the memory of Sophie's frightened eyes. Emily knew, if she faltered now, there might be no next chance, a steady resolve. The challenge was not just collecting evidence, but living in its shadow each day. Emily became an expert in vigilance, cataloging details: what time David came home, what mood he was in, whether the arguments escalated on weekends or after calls from work. Her journal, kept in code and hidden behind a shelf of cookbooks, detailed it all. She logged every instance, every pattern, piecing together a narrative of escalation that would, when the time came, be impossible for anyone to deny. One Friday evening, as Sophie and David watched TV together, Emily slipped away under the pretense of folding laundry. In the quiet of the bedroom, door cracked just enough to hear the living room's muffled laughter. She thumbed through her archive. Photos of bruises, logs of incidents, a growing batch of audio files, each one heavy with the question, would these be enough? The possibility of freedom seemed distant, almost abstract. Yet with every step she took, with every piece of evidence she stored, Emily's hope solidified into something firmer than before. No longer just a wish whispered in the dark, it became a plan. One built from fear and pain, yes, but also tenacity and love. The risk was enormous, but so was the stake. Her life, and more importantly, Sophie's sense of safety and childhood innocence. Quietly, methodically, Emily pressed on. The world still saw a perfect family, a loving mother, a devoted father, a bright-eyed little girl. But just beyond that picture window, Emily was fighting for something real, brick by brick, constructing the path to deliverance, determined that when the time came, her voice would finally be heard and believed. The truth unveiled, the first signs that something was shifting, came not with a bang, but with a flutter, a nervousness that tinged Emily's every action. The days grew heavier, weighted by a secret knowledge. She was no longer simply enduring, but quietly, methodically, seeking her deliverance. She moved through the house as she always had, preparing Sophie's backpack, folding laundry, returning calls from Sophie's school. Yet every routine was now laden with a sense of mission. Every glance at David, every word spoken in his presence, had to be measured, weighed, and made unremarkable.
I cannot help you.
Beneath her calm surface, Emily was plotting her escape. She knew the evidence she'd collected would mean nothing if it never reached anyone beyond her own trembling hands. Her first step was sending a file to Julia, the advocate at Safe Haven, Texas, via a borrowed tablet at the library. She disguised the packet as a recipe exchange, filled with innocuous subject lines and family-friendly attachments. But deep inside, the attachment was a password-protected file. Dates, photos, audio files, and her own narrative, quietly voiced in the hushed privacy of a library study booth. As she clicked send, her heart hammered in her chest. She looked around for watchers, but no one spared her a second glance. Outside the library, the world bustled on. School buses idling, children laughing, everyday noises at odds with the gravity of what she'd just risked. That evening, she felt a prickle of fear. David had been unpredictable lately, his moods swinging more violently, as if he sensed something he couldn't name. His questions became sharper. Why did you take so long at the store? Whose number is this in your phone? Emily answered carefully, never letting her voice tremble. But inside, panic thrummed with every passing day. Days blurred into each other as Emily anticipated Julia's response. When it finally came, disguised as a PTA email, relief and dread collided within her. Julia's careful message offered assurance. Everything is safe
Marcus.
and backed up. We're ready when you
It's
are.
Emily.
She attached a list of next steps.
Right.
Local shelters on standby, a trusted attorney who specialized in family violence cases, and the phone number of an officer with the local police trained in crisis response. The lifeline was set,
The executive access
but
logs
Emily
they
knew
show.
accepting it would mean detonating the
Significant
fragile
anomalies.
normalcy around her. The walls of the Parker home, a fortress for secrets, began to close in. Sophie, wise beyond her years,
I just hope
spoke in
someone believes
whispers
me.
when David was home. One afternoon, as Sophie was coloring
Thank you.
quietly in her room, Emily brought her a snack and crouched next to her, heart thudding. If you ever need to leave the house quickly with me,
Look at this.
we'll have a safe
There's a
place
back
to
door
go.
here.
Remember, if
see
I
it.
say grab your backpack, you do it right away, okay?
Lucas
Sophie's
confirmed the
eyes went
deletion of
wide,
audit logs.
but she nodded solemnly. Emily kissed her forehead, wishing she could shield her from every
We're in.
truth.
Run the suite
But
now.
knowing Sophie
Copy that.
deserved not
Initiating
just
sequence.
protection, but honesty. Everything changed the next rainy Thursday night. David came home in a foul temper, slamming the front door so hard the pictures rattled on the hallway wall. He tossed his briefcase on the kitchen counter, demanded dinner be ready, and barked at Sophie for her homework being scattered on the living room rug. Emily stepped between them, her voice gentle, trying to redirect his rage. But her calm, only oi, seemed to provoke him further. That night, after Sophie retreated to her bedroom, her door closed, her nightlight glowing, a final argument
I
erupted.
understand you've been having some
Emily
trouble
had been
adjusting.
careful
Yes,
with her
Mr.
phone
Wren,
all
I
week,
have.
hiding it in the laundry basket, switching it to airplane mode, fearful he'd check her search
We'll
history.
take any small win at this
Tonight,
point.
I know,
she wasn't
right?
careful enough. David's eyes narrowed
It
as he
has to be
spotted
that
the
way.
device.
Otherwise, the entire
Not
system
locked,
will be
a memo
compromised and
app
it will not
open.
work.
In a flash, he lunged for it, scrolling through her recordings. His face changed, color draining away, replaced by a dangerous stillness. Emily felt a chill race down her spine. "What is this, Emily?" he hissed, stepping closer. She could hear her own voice from the playback,
Won't let you get to
her desperate, whispered logs, little tapestries of pain and regret, pleading with a future
We must
listener
prioritize
to believe
civility
her.
and
Her
minimize
heart
all
pounded.
unnecessary
For a
risk.
split second, she considered running, grabbing Sophie
believe
and
Vision
flying
Tech has
out
a
the door.
promising future.
But David
If
blocked
we
her path,
approach these
his
challenges
voice growing
with strategic
sharper,
clarity.
more erratic. His threats came quick and scalding. "You think you can ruin me? You think anyone would believe these lies?" Emily's instincts kicked in. She tried to remain calm, tried to reason. "David, please. I just want us to be safe. This can't go on." But the last threads holding him together snapped. His hand closed around her arm, squeezing so hard she gasped.
I do
In
not
that
recall.
instant, Emily realized two things. First,
Well, that's
that
something.
all her fears of him finding
sure what to
out
make of
now
this.
stood before
Come
her,
on.
real and immediate. And second, that she was done being afraid. Sophie's door opened a crack, her small silhouette blinking in the hallway. "Mommy, is everything okay?" David yanked Emily's arm tighter, pulling her out of sight
Prepare the
from Sophie's
blockchain-based
line of
evidence
vision,
ledger.
and hissed,
Ready.
"Stay in your room." His voice was cold, foreign, a stranger's. In that electrified moment, Emily knew any more hesitation could be disastrous. Her mind flashed through Julia's plan, the code word, the safe neighbor, the emergency phone. She managed,
I'm sorry
her
to
voice
inform you that
steady,
your employment
but
has been
loud enough for
terminated,
Sophie
effective
and,
immediately.
she hoped,
See you out.
a neighbor to hear. "Sophie, get your backpack. Now."
We're gonna need a
David's
full list of
eyes
your social
registered shock, just for a heartbeat. As Emily twisted out of his grip, she darted down the hallway,
contacts. What's at stake here?
calling again for her daughter. With Sophie clutching her hand, Emily
Yes.
pushed out the front door, racing across the rain-slick porch. She banged on Mrs. Jensen's door, 3 houses down, shouting for help. The porch light flicked on, and Within moments, Mrs. Jensen had Emily and Sophie enveloped in her arms, ushering them in, already dialing 911. Through the rain-streaked windows, Emily saw David pacing in the yard, a caged animal stripped of his justifications. In the aftermath, time seemed to stagger. The police arrived quickly, called by both Mrs. Jensen and another neighbor who'd overheard the commotion. Emily handed her phone, audio files, photos, and her trembling testimony all together to the officers. She showed the log she'd kept, the bruises still visible beneath her sleeve, the messages Julia had coached her to forward. For the first time, her truth was not a secret. It was recorded, documented, and handed off to people with the power to help. As David was handcuffed on the porch, yelling denials to the dark, Emily sat beside Sophie in Mrs. Jensen's warmly lit kitchen. Sophie cried, clutching a mug of cocoa, but Emily's own tears brought relief, not just grief. She hugged her daughter fiercely, whispering that they were safe, that this time the nightmare wouldn't follow them back through the door. The truth was out, raw, dangerous, and uncontainable. The days ahead promised legal battles, probing questions, and moments of doubt. But in the kitchen's safe cocoon, Emily felt something she'd nearly forgotten: hope. For all the cracks in their old life, she and Sophie were together and believed. And as the night wore on, and the rain finally eased, Emily allowed herself to imagine a future where her daughter could finally sleep peacefully, knowing the darkness had lost its power behind their doors. Rising up to fight, the night Emily and Sophie fled into the rain marked the end of one existence and the agonizing beginning of another. Under the bright, hospital-like lights of Mrs. Jensen's kitchen, the reality of escape took on a hard, unfamiliar edge. Sophie's small hand clung tightly to Emily's as the police entered their neighbor's home, quietly requesting statements. David's shouting still echoed faintly across the street. But, encircled by Mrs. Jensen's arms and the reassuring authority of the first responders, Emily allowed herself, for just a moment, to believe this new safety might last. Once David was gone, whisked away by the officers, the immediate threat lifted. But with freedom came a different sort of terror, the uncertainty of the future. Emily had long rehearsed what she would do if she and Sophie ever made it out. Now that it was happening, she found herself stunned, her thoughts a patchwork of relief, exhaustion, and raw, unfiltered fear. The police assigned a female officer, Officer Ramirez, to stay with mother and daughter until Safe Haven, Texas, sent someone from their crisis team. Ramirez's presence was warm yet professional, and Sophie, still in her pajamas, relaxed in her lap enough to fall asleep. Emily, meanwhile, sat on the edge of the couch, knees trembling, fingers twisted, answering every question with clinical clarity. She described each bruise, replayed each outburst, handed over digital evidence that Julia had already backed up, and tried to remember details through the haze of adrenaline. What time did David return home? Did he threaten to harm her or Sophie directly? Did Sophie witness any acts of violence? An ambulance arrived, and the paramedics checked over both of them. Emily's bruised arm was photographed as evidence, and Sophie was offered gentle reassurance. They refused a hospital stay, knowing what they hungered for most was a friend's safe guest room and a warm cup of tea. Still, the paramedics left behind advice and a packet for trauma resources, plus a gentle promise that they, too, would testify if called. When the Safe Haven advocate, Julia, appeared, Emily nearly collapsed into her arms. Julia explained the temporary restraining order the police would file, which would prevent David from contacting or approaching them. In a flurry of paperwork, plans were drawn for an emergency shelter if needed. Mrs. Jensen and Ava, the neighbor Emily once confided in, quickly offered their homes for the nights ahead. Julia recommended a therapist who specialized in children and PTSD, and the advocate promised to walk with Emily through every upcoming legal step. But even wrapped in layers of support, peace was fragile. Emily's phone vibrated, silent but insistent, as David's family texted and called, demanding explanations and urging her to drop the charges. Rumors began swirling in hushed voices at church and school. The fear of social isolation nipped at Emily's resolve, and more than once, she found herself staring at the ceiling, dreading the moment she'd have to recount her story to strangers, officers, social workers, child advocacy professionals, and eventually, a judge. Sophie's trauma surfaced in subtle, wrenching ways. The little girl grew unusually quiet, flinching at loud noises, clinging to Emily's side, and waking from nightmares that left her whimpering in the dark. Emily read every article she could find on childhood trauma, determined not to fail her daughter now that the physical threat was gone. She scheduled counseling, encouraged Sophie to draw pictures and use words for her feelings, and coaxed her outside for gentle walks when anxiety threatened to trap them both indoors. For Emily, coping meant carefully managing each day, 1 hour at a time. She journaled the aftermath, documenting interactions with David's relatives and follow-ups with law enforcement, leaving nothing to memory alone. Each time doubt crept in, when a sympathetic coworker wondered if things really were that bad, or when David's mother called, sobbing, to ask her to think of the family, Emily reviewed her photos, her audio files, and the cold finality of that night's violence. The world outside could whisper its doubts. Inside, the truth was unshakable. The legal system moved with painful slowness and, at times, bewildering bureaucracy. Emily filed for a long-term, protective order with Julia by her side. The courthouse's marble corridors and looming doors were intimidating, but she walked through them with her head held high, Sophie's small hand clasped in hers. At every hearing, she repeated her story to prosecutors and advocates, while David, in a suit and tie, maintained a face of indignation and sorrow. At their first appearance together, his attorney tried to portray Emily as unstable, using her recent stress and exhaustion as weapons against her. Emily sat utterly still, knowing her credibility would be a battleground, but also knowing she had armed herself far better than most. The community's response was predictably mixed. Some families, on their quiet street, brought over hot meals and cards, expressing shame for not noticing sooner. Others avoided Emily at the grocery store, eyes sliding away in discomfort or disbelief. At church, whispers followed her down the aisles. People offered smiles that were strained and uncertain. A few close friends, those Emily had chosen to trust during her months of secret evidence gathering, became her steadfast allies, driving Sophie to school, helping with errands, and checking in morning and night. Emily's most difficult challenge was learning to trust the process and herself. In the safety of her temporary refuge, she lay awake for hours, imagining David lurking outside, picturing the worst-case scenarios. Would he respect the police order or try to reach her through friends? Would prosecutors drop the case or force Sophie to testify? These questions circled endlessly in her mind.
Spotting true
But each
allies.
morning, she stood up, dressed Sophie for school, scheduled interviews with the district attorney, and submitted to more interviews. Slowly, painfully,
I totally agree.
Emily learned that guilt and shame clung stubbornly,
Really fantastic.
even after the violence ended. But as days turned to weeks, she watched herself become someone new. The act of fighting back, of seeing her story through the eyes of police, advocates, and the legal system,
It's amazing to see
transformed
these
her
changes.
from a victim
I agree. The
into a
space feels so
survivor.
much more open
The
now.
trauma lingered in flashes, a slammed door, a raised voice, the sound of rain against window panes. But Emily began letting hope return. She enrolled Sophie in weekend art classes and started attending a survivors support group run by Safe Haven. There, surrounded by women whose stories mirrored hers in detail and heartache, Emily shed some of her deepest fears. Together, they laughed, cried, and rebuilt their sense of agency word by word.
We found our way again.
Emily did not kid herself. Justice would not erase what David had
Let's
done,
never settle for less.
nor would it grant instant healing. But each day that she spoke the truth, each time she walked into a courtroom or comforted her trembling child, she claimed more ground for herself and for Sophie. The road ahead was difficult and uncertain, but she was no longer powerless, no longer alone. By daring to fight, Emily transformed her own pain into a promise that she and her daughter would never again be silenced, that through courage and community, even the deepest wounds could one day be replaced with the slow bloom of hope. When justice speaks for weeks, Emily had counted down to her court date with a mixture of dread and hope. The courthouse itself cast a daunting shadow, its stone pillars and American flag reminders to her of how public everything would soon become. With every passing day, preparations for the trial gathered momentum. Depositions were taken, evidence was reviewed, and the Advocacy Center helped Emily practice her testimony until her voice, though trembling, rang with conviction. Still, it was the prospect of seeing David on the witness stand that haunted her dreams. On the morning of the trial, Emily dressed carefully, choosing a modest navy dress and a simple scarf that hid the fading bruises along her arm. She took Sophie to Julia's office at Safe Haven before making her way, with Julia and her attorney, to the imposing county courthouse. Local reporters gathered beyond the steps. Some neighbors, drawn by weeks of rumor, stood quietly among the crowd. For Emily, the attention only deepened her resolve. She would not turn away from her truth, no matter who was watching. The courtroom's gravity inside, the courtroom felt both cavernous and suffocating. Rows of benches filled with curious onlookers, friends offering quiet support, and, on the opposite side, David's co-workers and relatives whispering anxiously among themselves. David sat at the defense table, his suit pressed, his hair neatly combed, projecting an air of calm contrition. Only those who truly looked close noticed the flicker of anger beneath his composed exterior. The judge, an experienced woman in her 60s, presided with firm compassion, determined to maintain order throughout the proceedings. The prosecution laid out their comprehensive case, beginning with photos of Emily's injuries, audio clips of David's menacing voice, and a carefully documented timeline of abuse. The advocate from Safe Haven testified about Emily's fear and the careful planning that preceded her escape. Each piece of evidence Emily had gathered in secret was now displayed and examined in the harsh light of scrutiny. Voices emerge. The voices that followed shook the courtroom. Mrs. Jensen, clutching her purse tightly, described the night Emily and Sophie sought sanctuary on her doorstep, her voice cracking when she recounted Sophie's trembling. Ava recounted quiet conversations and small moments when Emily's pain nearly slipped past her mask. Teachers and coaches from Sophie's school shared stories of Sophie's withdrawn behavior and Emily's visible anxiety during pickups. One by one, their testimony formed a chorus, a tapestry of truth that challenged the image David had spent years cultivating. Emily's turn to speak arrived far sooner than she felt ready. The attorney's questions guided her through the hardest memories, the humiliation of hiding bruises, the terror of Sophie witnessing violence, the midnight hours spent planning escape routes and memorizing her advocate's instructions. David's lawyer, as predicted, came at her with skepticism, questioning her mental state, her motives, and the timing of her disclosures. Emily stood firm, refusing to let doubt muddy the reality she'd fought so hard to document. During a tense cross-examination, David's legal team suggested that Emily had exaggerated events for custody and financial gain. Their attempt to undermine her character stung, but each time they pressed, the prosecution countered with hard evidence, documentation that matched her narrative, witnesses who corroborated her isolation, emails that undercut David's claims of innocence. The facts spoke louder than the tactics. The unmasking of David himself eventually took the stand. He spoke with measured regret about stress, marital challenges, and how he always tried his best for the family. With practiced ease, he dodged pointed questions and painted himself as a wounded husband, blindsided by Emily's accusations. Yet under cross-examination, cracks widened in his facade. The prosecution played an audio file in which David's threats, so often concealed by charm in public, rang out disturbingly clear. His answers faltered. His eyes darted toward the jury. When his mother was called as a character witness, her initial bravado dissolved under careful questioning. Her recollections of a happy home undermined by neighbors' observations and Emily's meticulous evidence. With each day in court, David's social mask peeled away. The whispers among church friends, the exchanging of glances by co-workers, grew louder until his reputation eroded. Emily felt it happening, a shift in the room as the image David had so carefully crafted began to collapse under the reality of his actions. The community responds outside the courthouse. The case was the subject of quiet debate. Some community members struggled with disbelief, clinging to the image of David they had always known. Others apologized to Emily for never seeing the signs. Supporters from the survivors group left encouraging notes in Emily's car, assuring her she wasn't alone. Behind the whispers and headlines, a deeper conversation about family violence simmered in the small Texas town. News coverage remained measured, aiming to protect Sophie's identity while acknowledging the larger issue. Interviews with advocates reframed the case as one example in a disturbing local trend, reminding readers that, behind many closed doors, similar stories went unseen. For Emily, the public aspect was both support and burden. She fielded difficult questions about forgiveness, about her own future, about how she would help Sophie heal. Each time she answered honestly, her shame lessened and her sense of agency grew, awaiting the verdict. As the trial drew to a close, Emily felt both hope and trembling exhaustion. The closing arguments played out before a silent courtroom. The prosecutor's remarks cut through the din. The evidence you've heard is not simply a family matter gone wrong. It is a pattern of coercion, intimidation, and violence. Justice demands we believe the silenced voices. The jury's deliberation stretched over 2 days. Emily tried to fill the waiting hours with small routines. Reading to Sophie, calling her sister in another state, attending group meetings when she could. Sophie clung to her, sometimes asking, "Are we safe now?" Emily always answered, "Yes, sweetheart, we're safe." Still, she slept poorly, poised for any reminder of the chaos they'd left behind. Justice, finally heard. The verdict, guilty, arrived on a gray afternoon. Emily's knees nearly buckled as the words were read. David was convicted on charges of domestic battery, child endangerment, and violating protective orders. There would be a separate hearing for sentencing and for custodial arrangements, but already the air in the room felt lighter. The judge addressed Emily directly. "Your strength in coming forward sends a message to others who suffer in silence. This court believes you, and your daughter deserves to grow up free from harm." After the trial, Emily stood on the courthouse steps, sunlight breaking through the clouds. The journey ahead remained daunting. They would need counseling, time, and patient understanding to mend what had been broken. But as old neighbors nodded respectfully and Julia gripped her hand in solidarity, Emily realized justice was more than a verdict. It was a restored sense of safety, dignity, and possibility. Inside, Sophie clung to her mother as reporters faded into the background. "Can we go home now?" she whispered. Emily knelt, cupping Sophie's face. "Wherever we go, as long as we're together, that's home." The voice of justice, at long last, had spoken, and this time it echoed far beyond the walls of any courtroom. Rebirth in freedom. The courthouse lights had faded, the jury had spoken, and the bruises that once adorned Emily's skin were now fading jewels in the wake of justice. For the first time in years, she didn't live in anticipation of David's footsteps or the unpredictable churn of his temper. The world felt different, less menacing, somehow steeled with the possibility of hope. Freedom, once an abstract dream she'd whispered to Sophie as a bedtime promise, now hovered within reach, fragile but achingly real. In practical terms, the aftermath was an avalanche of logistics. Emily and Sophie did not return to their old house. Instead, with help from Safe Haven, Texas, they found a small rental apartment across town. The rooms felt sparse at first, echoing with the unfamiliarity of their new beginning. Empty walls, the scent of fresh paint, mattresses on the floor, and mismatched chairs, borrowed from Mrs. Jensen and Ava. Yet, it was not the things that made it home, but the sense of safety, of waking up without dread. Every morning, Emily rose before Sophie, steeping coffee in silence. She looked out the window at their complex playground, bathed in soft sunlight, and allowed herself a moment of quiet victory. The act of opening the curtains was a daily declaration. She had nothing left to conceal. Sophie blossomed slowly. Gone were the days of constant vigilance, the subtle flinches at raised voices or slammed doors. Instead, she began to laugh again, tentatively first, then with greater ease. Emily enrolled her in a Saturday art class and watched as Sophie's drawings moved from dark, jagged scribbles to bright landscapes and smiling figures. At night, Sophie slept curled beside her stuffed rabbit, breathing deeply, her small hand sometimes reaching for Emily's. The night terrors persisted for a while, but as days passed, Their frequency dwindled, replaced with dreams she could not recall in the morning. Rebuilding meant more than just physical relocation. It demanded the slow reconstruction of routine, trust, and self-worth. Emily found work at a local florist, a quiet shop smelling of damp earth and lilies. The owner, a kind, widowed woman named Marion, offered her not only a job, but gentle encouragement. "You and your daughter are safe here," Marion said simply. The repetitive tasks, arranging bouquets, sweeping petals from the tile, became meditative, healing in their predictability. Still, healing was neither linear nor easy. Emily did not shy away from these conversations. She explained truthfully, but gently, that their life now was about safety, kindness, and respect, and that families do not always look the same. When Sophie drew pictures, labeling their new family as Mommy and Me, Emily hung them on the fridge with pride. Their social circle, once built around David in a carefully curated image of perfection, shifted fundamentally. Some neighbors from the old street lost contact. Others, like Mrs. Jensen and Ava, became stronger allies than ever. Mrs. Jensen sent postcards and jars of homemade jam, and Ava visited on weekends with her own daughter, forging new memories for the girls. Emily began to build trust with her co-workers and the parents at Sophie's art class, forging bonds that were not dependent on secrecy or pretense. Emily also found solace in the survivor support group at Safe Haven, Texas. Each week, in a room filled with women from all walks of life, she discovered solidarity in shared experience. They spoke openly about shame, anger, fear, but also about joy, new love, and the fierce pride that came from surviving. These conversations helped Emily untangle years of manipulation. She learned to forgive herself for not leaving sooner and to celebrate incremental victories. A full week without nightmares. Sophie's first sleepover invite. The courage to laugh without apology. Financial hardship was a reality. David's income had once supported a comfortable lifestyle. Now, Emily learned to budget with care, couponing and watching sales at the grocery store. She made a game of hunting for secondhand treasures at the thrift store with Sophie, turning lack into adventure. With every skill, Emily taught her daughter how to build a bookshelf, how to cook pasta, how to plant basil in a painted pot. They both reclaimed a little more dignity and a lot more joy. The legal battles did not end overnight. Custody arrangements were hammered out in tense courtrooms. David's appeals processed and denied, each appearance a test of Emily's endurance. Yet having her day in court gave her a voice she'd long been denied. With each ruling, the past's grip weakened further. Over time, Emily noticed the subtle softening in her own reflection. The hauntedness had faded, replaced by laugh lines and a clearer gaze. She enrolled in a community college course online, inspired by her dreams of becoming a counselor or advocate. If there was one thing her ordeal had taught her, it was the desperate need for patient, unwavering support. For Sophie, the transformation was visible in ways big and small. A beaming smile at the dinner table, elaborate puppet shows for Emily's entertainment, whispered secrets exchanged with new friends. When asked by a classmate why she didn't have a daddy at home, Sophie simply shrugged and said, "It's me and my mom. That's enough." Their lives were not without scars, but those wounds had begun to knit into the fabric of their story. On difficult days, Emily sat with Sophie on their small balcony and watched the Texas sun slip low behind red rooftops. "We're safe now," she'd murmur, the words a balm and a prayer. Sophie would rest her head on Emily's shoulder, both believing, at last, that it was true. Months passed, and what began as mere survival evolved into living. Emily volunteered to speak at safe haven fundraisers, sharing her journey so others might find courage. She joined book clubs and community picnics, no longer shrinking in crowds. Each milestone, first birthday celebrated in freedom, first family photo in their new apartment, became proof that rebirth was not only possible, but powerful. Rebirth in freedom was not a single moment, but a series of small, stubborn choices. Every day, Emily and Sophie rose to meet. They built a life rooted in honesty, compassion, and hope. And though the past would never fully vanish, it no longer defined them. Together, mother and daughter moved forward, not perfectly, but triumphantly, carrying the lessons of their journey into a future of their own making. The scars that remain freedom, as Emily had learned, was not a finish line. It was a horizon, always visible, sometimes close, and sometimes aching to reach. Even as weeks turned into months and the rhythms of daily life finally settled, the wounds she and Sophie had sustained beneath David's roof did not simply vanish. The court documents were finalized, their new apartment furnished with thrifted finds and budding houseplants, and Sophie's artwork lined the refrigerator door. But invisible scars lingered, etched into their hearts and habits, just as real, if not more so, than any bruise. Emily found herself grappling with the paradox of survival. Gratitude for newfound safety intermingled with the restless ache of loss. On the surface, she moved forward as best she could, working her shifts at the flower shop, walking Sophie to school, sharing coffee dates with fellow survivors. Yet sometimes, in the most mundane moments, a slammed door in the hallway, the urgent beep of her phone, her heart would lurch, unbidden memories flashing through her mind. A chill of panic, a flash of anger, the certainty that she would never be quite the same. Anxiety in the everyday, each day, held subtle challenges, even if the world around them barely noticed. Emily often woke before sunrise, her sleep fractured by half-remembered dreams of escape. She checked the locks twice before going to bed, her mind replaying old routines of vigilance. Sophie sensed this too. Some mornings, she would curl up beside Emily without speaking, seeking comfort in the familiar rhythm of her mother's heartbeat. At school, Sophie was quieter than some of her peers, by turns, fiercely independent, and suddenly fragile. She sometimes flinched when surprised from behind, or went mute during loud thunderstorms. Her teacher gently noted, "Sophie is bright and kind, but she gets overwhelmed sometimes. Would you like to talk about it?" Emily appreciated the concern, and together they coordinated with the school counselor, hoping time, patience, and support would help unravel the knots David left behind. Support and relapse. For Emily, the survivors' support group remained a crucial anchor. The circle of women, each with their own story, their own scars, offered understanding that no well-meaning outsider could. They spoke candidly about good days and setbacks, about nightmares that returned months after safety was achieved, about trust issues that complicated dating and friendships. Emily found herself talking about guilt, about the persistent voice that wondered if she could have left sooner or spared Sophie more pain. Sometimes, triggered by anniversaries, a holiday once ruined by David's temper, the memory of the night they fled, Emily's anxiety surged, She would snap at Sophie, then crumble with regret. She'd catch herself trembling in crowded stores or freezing at the sound of a man's raised voice. In those moments, she reminded herself to breathe, to call Julia or Marion, or to journal her fear rather than let it fester. Healing, she realized, was neither neat nor quick. Parenting, with scars, Sophie's emotional world was equally complex. She asked hard questions about her father, about why some friends had stopped visiting, about whether her family was normal. Emily answered with as much honesty as she could, always reassuring Sophie that their new life was exactly what it needed to be: honest, safe, and centered on mutual care. Still, Emily noticed Sophie sometimes sought approval with an anxious intensity or became distressed by the thought of disappointing her teachers. At bedtime, she sometimes whispered, "You'll always keep me safe, right?" And Emily would promise, holding her tightly, even on nights she doubted her own strength. Therapy was an ongoing process. There were weeks when Sophie skipped in, eager to show her therapist a new drawing, and others when she refused to speak at all. Progress often came in small increments: a new friend made, a fear confided aloud, a full night's sleep without a nightmare, social stigma, and advocacy. While Emily built a foundation for herself and her daughter, she could not escape the ripple effects of David's actions or the shallow judgment of some in their Texas community. There were neighbors who pretended not to see her at the grocery store or whispered when she volunteered at school events. She overheard fragments like, "I just never thought David was like that," or "Those things only happen in the movies." Emily's answer to isolation was not retreat, but engagement. She began speaking at Safe Haven, Texas events and soon found herself mentoring other women privately. She volunteered to help newcomers write their safety plans or navigate court paperwork. Each time she spoke out, another layer of her own shame peeled away. She gradually realized that advocacy was a way not only to heal, but also to challenge the silence and misunderstanding that let abuse persist. National context and wider change. As Emily's confidence grew, her awareness of the scale of domestic violence in America deepened. She read statistics. 1 in 4 women would experience intimate partner violence, and saw her story echoed in national headlines and stories from across the country. She attended local town halls, advocating for better resources and protection for victims. This awareness, however, brought its own kind of grief. She knew her story was far from unique, even if, for many, it was unspoken. Their scars, hidden by fear, shame, or cultural expectation. Emily wrote essays for local newsletters, highlighting not just her pain, but the gaps in the system, in the power of collective action. Her voice, once silenced behind closed doors, now resonated in public forums. Living with the scars, time worked slowly, but it did work. As months turned to a year, Emily and Sophie's lives, though forever changed, began to fill with new experiences and authentic joy. Still, Emily knew that trauma left echoes, moments of self-doubt, flashes of sorrow, and periodic guilt. She sometimes wondered how Sophie would feel about her childhood as she grew older, or whether she was strong enough to guide her daughter through the teen years and beyond. But these unanswered questions no longer paralyzed her. They built new rituals: Sunday pancakes, watching old movies, painting flower pots for the balcony. On the hardest days, Emily and Sophie would light a candle at sunset and share one thing that made them grateful. These moments didn't erase the past, but they offered a gentle balm for the pain, a new kind of strength. Scar tissue, Emily learned, is evidence of both injury and resilience. It did not mean forgetting what had happened, nor did it erase the responsibility of protecting Sophie's future. It meant living honestly, owning vulnerability, holding space for grief, and trusting that brokenness could coexist with hope. Sometimes, healing meant accepting the wound rather than wishing it away. As Emily tucked Sophie into bed one night, the little girl whispered, "We're really okay now, aren't we, Mom?" Emily smiled, brushing a strand of hair from Sophie's eyes. "Yes, sweetheart, we're okay. We're strong enough, even when we remember." And in the quiet that followed, Emily understood. The scars would never be gone, but neither would their courage, nor the hard-won wisdom that freedom is not about erasing the past, but daring to build a future in full view of it.